And without further ado, we're going to go ahead and bring on our special guest of the day, Mrs. Sorry if I didn't, address that correctly. Miss Anne Marie Sabath, how are you doing this morning?
Great, Cipriani. Good to see you and AJ. Thanks for having me on.
Hey!
Yeah, and AJ's got your book there. Go ahead, show that again, AJ. So this is your newest book. We'll go ahead and give people a little slate of all your uh, published pieces here. But that one right there, the wannabe investor 40 must know facts before buying your first stock. So Anne Marie, what would you say is a first tip for people that are sitting on the fence that want to be investors?
Well, the first tip is to learn the language before you plunge in. That's critical. I was a wannabe for many, many decades. And when I finally met someone who was not digging into my pocket and learned by doing it himself, I said, "You must teach me." And studied with him as a friend for 10 years. And I was so shocked by how easy it was by learning the lingo, by creating what you said, AJ, with options, by creating a recipe or a formula that I had to write this book because I know that more than 40% of Americans are not in the stock market.
Yeah, I have to say that that is an astonishing high number, especially since, in my late 20s was when I started to figure out I didn't want to be constantly reporting to somebody working behind a desk. And so that's when I started to learn the lingo myself. And it is a lingo. It's almost like a made up language just to keep folks out. I almost think back to like the French Revolution when, the upper class of France was making their language so that the lower class couldn't speak. It's almost the same thing. Uh, I have a lot of folks that don't know if they're too old or even if they're too young to pull the trigger. Anne-Marie, I know you have some experience with this. Like, is there a point where you just throw up your hands and you like, I say, I missed the boat. This is not for me.
Are you kidding? I was in my sixth decade before I started investing. Sixth
How could
decade.
that be? You look like
My
you're only in your fourth or fifth decade
battery
now.
will give you everywhere, and I would never go back. This is it's a much easier time. Kids are grown. No, forget it. My point is, if you're never too young or too old to invest in the market. And let me tell you, it's magnificent. If I would have known this, I would not have worked like a darn fool for 33 years, 70-hour weeks. Except I never thought I had enough money. I didn't know how to open a brokerage account. I I thought that you had to pay more on your mortgage than begin investing. It was like, and when I found this out and learned I could do it, I have every book on investing, from Jeremy Siegel's books to Benjamin Graham's The Common Sense of Investing. I had all of them, and I didn't understand the lingo. Now I understand it. And I wrote this wannabe investor book,
Yeah.
so that real people can understand it. It's like taking basic Spanish. That's what this is about.
Well, and that's why I wanted to have you on the show because I picked
Thank you.
up your book just in passing and I was like, this book might be below me. And I got into it. And then I also gave it to my wife and we couldn't put it down. I mean, there's all this like stuff that I know, but it was explained like, I would almost say to all the folks that join my program, before you even do anything, take a weekend or a week and go through Anne Marie's book because it just explains things in plain English so that you can go back and the must know facts and then the call to action at the end. I mean, this was just like the perfect primer. Well, first of all, I decided, and sorry, there's no connection between me and Anne Marie besides the fact that I read her book. But I have to say that I was just enthralled because, there was a call to action the end, you could take this book and be totally, a self-sustaining investor, or you can use it as a primer to then be able to go deeper. It fills in all those necessary gaps that I'm sure some of you have felt when you try to dive too quickly into the deep end of being like a full-time trader or something like that. But I guess I do have a question for you. You know, if you knew now, no, if you knew then what you know now about investing, what would you do different? Is there something that you might do different, Anne Marie, back then if you knew what you knew now?
Yes, I had my money in CDs for 30 years. Are you kidding
Oh,
me? I did not, I didn't trust having somebody else invest for me only because I didn't understand what they were doing. I didn't mind having a financial advisor. However, the person was speaking a complete different language, and I needed to understand what that person was doing with my hard earned money. And because I didn't understand it, I said, I'm putting my money in CDs. And so, what would I have done? I wish that I had met someone who had invested on his own, and the person who taught me had been in the market for 55 years. He's a retired violinist with the New York Philharmonic, and he learned by doing. And he told me, look, you only have to be right more than wrong. He said, you don't trade, you invest. And let me tell you what, it worked for him. And after 10 years, I added a zero to my portfolio because of following the principles. I mean, this is not an infomercial. I can tell you, I'm not an advisor. I have nothing to sell except information to help people create their own success.
well, let me ask you this. I have often found that when you're finding somebody who, you can learn from, one thing you said that really worked with me was you said, "Hey, find somebody who's doing it, not somebody who's done it, but who is doing it right now." But what about finding somebody who can convey the information? That's what I liked about your book, because I have followed some folks that obviously they were doing it. They would do it right in front of me, in front of the computer. But man, I would ask them questions and they couldn't distill the information down into language that I understood, and that's what I always try to tell folks. What kind of advice would you give people on that front?
Well, I would say exactly what you said. And let me create an analogy. 100 years ago, I was a Spanish teacher. And the reason I loved teaching students is because I had to learn the language. I was not a native speaker. And it's the same thing with investing. I had to learn investing. And so when I wrote this book, I said, I have to write it like a wannabe, as though letting them know I didn't know anything. And it took me 9 years to be able to, actually 10 years. I'm still learning. However, I can do it by myself. And the point is, you need to be able to be on the same wavelength as someone and listen, and then put a little in at a time. And, there's something called dollar cost averaging. Little by little by little, you should still have funded your IRA, your retirement account, to the fullest. However, this means what I'm talking about when you invest in stocks. Instead of, I go shopping every day living in New York in my closet. I don't need another pair of black slacks. God only knows. Sure, I buy a pair of shoes when they're so bad that the shoemaker won't even fix them. And yes, I'll go out to dinner, but I don't buy Starbucks coffee. I invest in the stock. The point is, take what you have and ask yourself, you don't need to make more money. You simply need to decide, what are you doing with what you have? That's the point.
Well, that brings up another good point that I wanted to, you know, there's more. Would you agree that there's more to, investing and making money than just the mechanical part of it? There's something else. There's got to be a mindset. Do you agree with that?
Well, there is a mindset. And what it is, I mean, I've learned over the last 11 years now that I'm now working smart. I'm not working hard. Yes, I still have a business. However, truly, my investments have funded my business. They have funded my business. I borrow from one person, me. That's it. And so the funny thing is, there's so many funny things. Number one, to become when I wrote this book, I wrote it because, and I'm not plugging my this book, What Self-Made Millionaires Do. However, I learned that one of the 52 secrets that the 20 self-made millionaires had was they had passive income. I didn't have passive income. I was working like a darn fool. And so that's when I put two and two together, started investing in the market after learning, and was very careful about how I invested. And I recognized that this is a way to do it. So you have to clone your behavior. If you're going to work hard, work smart. If you're going to invest, invest smart. That's what we're talking about. And remember something, it's not timing the market. I love technical analysis. It's so bad. I mean, it's so bad. I love it so much that we would never have somebody break in our house listening to what we talk about because it's about technical analysis. They'd be bored to death. I love that. And so the key is because it's a language. Charts don't lie. And I'm sure I'm speaking your lingo, right, AJ?
Yeah,
I mean, it's right
absolutely.
there. Nobody makes this up. And so the point is when you see things, seeing is believing. This is really what it's about. And if do you mind if I share what I did when to start investing?
Yeah. Yeah.
Well,
How did you get into that?
thank you. Well, what happened when I finally had enough confidence listening to this individual, his name is Alan. I said, okay, well, I'm going to take $25,000 and I want to invest the first day of the year in what is called the Dogs of the Dow. Dogs of the Dow. And this is in one of my sections. It's in section 34. And the Dogs of the Dow, the dogs mean, oh, what a dog, what a loser. Well, the Dogs of the Dow are part of the Dow Jones, the Dow 30. And so in my case, I took the five lowest stocks per share. So maybe they were $15 or $100, whatever it was a share, that paid the highest dividends. And this is a strategy that's been going on I don't know when it started, but forever. And so I said, I'll do that. And then I'm not going to touch it for 1 year. And studies have shown that over a long period of time, these Dogs of the Dow go ahead and they earn X amount of dollars. And if you compare them on page 187 of the book, you see what the Dogs of the Dow have done. I use the small dogs, meaning the five, versus whatever, the Dow Jones, the whatever the case. I'll give you an example. The small dogs of the Dow in 2019 did 9.20%. The Dow Jones, in that case, did 25%. The S&P did 31%. However, it switches because sometimes I see the Dogs of the Dow did 20%, and they were actually even with the S&P or with Magellan or whatever the case. So the idea is you have to do what you're comfortable with so that you can actually look at it, test it, and go from there. I talk to every Uber driver, and probably every Uber driver has a copy of the Wannabe Investor. And the Uber driver from last night was telling me that he does futures and he really made a big mistake. He lost $250,000. And I said, well, why? And he said, well, I was too greedy. I was too greedy with what I thought I was going to make. And this is the case. And so, we talked about it. I said, I'm not a rocket scientist. You're 28. You have a long time. However, why don't you invest in stocks? Well, it's like wanting to be part of the Indianapolis 500. He wanted something fast. However, he knows what he's doing. He knows when he's going to stop. So the whole point is, options traders often, as you know better than I do, start by investing in stocks. And sometimes they're so exhausted by doing options that they may go back to stocks or they may diversify. Is that a fair comment, AJ?
That is, especially those folks that really don't grasp, some of the nuances of options, which make options, more flexible than stocks. But if you're just jumping as a leveraged instrument from stocks to options, you might get like overwhelmed by the moves. So that was one of my questions was what brought you, I always say that you could as an investor figure out any of the different, vehicles and make it work for you if you stick with it and you master it, and just find the one that works for you and works for your lifestyle, learn it, master it, and then go forward and don't get distracted. What brought you specifically to stocks?
Well, what brought me to stocks was Alan had invested in stocks from the time he was 22 years old. As I said, he was a violinist and he was doing a solo, and his musician friend next to him said, he pointed out to the conductor, and he said, he's very wealthy. And Alan asked, how is that? And he said, he owns a lot of Coca-Cola. So the next week, we're talking about 1962, the next week, Alan had $1,000 in his savings account. Coca-Cola was $100 a share at that time. He bought 10 shares of Coke. Now, when I was writing the book, I emailed the investor relations of Coke and I said, if I bought 10 shares of Coke at $100 in 1962, what would it be worth today if I had kept it? $2.5 million. Now, that was a year and a half ago when we were writing the book. The point is, now, do I invest in Coke? You know what? Everybody has to invest in what they feel is best for them. That's the most important. I have my grandkids in Coke. However, Coke is not my style. I drink it off sometimes. However, the point is you have to decide, what are you? Are you at low risk?
I drink mine with some bourbon on a Friday evening.
I'll give you any bourbon I have. I'll take more Coke. And so the key is, what are you? Are you a low risk? Are you a medium risk? Are you a high risk? And I'll tell you, when I invest in a stock, I love stocks. When I invest in a stock, I get to know the owner. I finished reading The NVIDIA Way, which is about NVIDIA and Jensen Huang. And let me tell you what, I have a lot invested in NVIDIA, and I thought, I want to know if he was the right person. Are you kidding me? I invested more. That man knows how to work. He believes in this. NVIDIA is an appendage of his. I believe in Apple because I love Tim Cook. I love Steve Jobs because they lead the pack. The question is, would you choose these people as friends? This is a big thing. Are they logical if that's what you want?
Yeah. Yeah. I get that. That's so, folks, that's the whole story. This book totally captivated me because it wasn't like it was new information, but it was presented in a way. Well, there were a couple of tidbits that were new, especially the part where Anne Marie challenged me at the end. And so I'm going to leave that to you guys to go and grab a copy of the book and be challenged yourself. But the scoop is she presented things in a way that allowed me to wrap my head around stuff. And I've been doing this for almost 30 years. And for me to get so excited about a book about investing, it had to be written very well. And so I can't give it enough kudos, Cyprian.
Yeah, and so Anne Marie, that's the wannabe investor. And prior to the show, you told me that you're wrapping up the wannabe Minute Master 30 Steps to Becoming Affluent, which you said is coming out later this year. Is that correct?
It is. It's coming out January 13th, 2026. And the reason I decided to write it is I realized, when you finally have enough money for food, shelter, clothing, enough to be able to share with your children once a year, you don't have to worry about it. Now, the question was, what do you really want? And it's a matter of time. And so I studied why and how, what it is to become more time affluent. And, at first I thought it was boring. And then I started putting this into practice. And it really makes a difference. In fact, we're creating the Wannabe series. We own the Wannabe, like the dummy. And so there are several other Wannabe books that are coming out after that. This is what it's about. I love helping people be successful because, again, I want to make it easier for them. And I love telling people what to do.
I have to say, speaking of that whole minute thing, that's one of the biggest things. And I don't know if you found the same thing when it comes to investing, but switching your mind to realizing when you're an investor, you're not trading your time for money like when you're an employee. Instead, you have to be able to be efficient in your moves and in your thoughts and how you place your investments, how you place your trades, how you buy your stocks. It's not about, hey, if I sit in front of the screen for 8 hours, I'm going to make X amount of money investing. That's not how it works. And so I see how actually these two books, this book that you've written and then the book that's coming out, might be related, at least in the thought process.
Well, time and money really go hand in hand. And if I may say something as an aside, one of the things I learned, and it made sense, is in order to be successful, you must have 2 hours to yourself each day. Now I know why I get up two
Oh,
hours earlier or an hour earlier, why I step an hour later than anybody in my family. That means the dog too, because I need my time to just do what I want. And so when you have, it allows you to be centered, happy, to just have that time for you. I don't care if it's in 20-minute increments. I do it in hour increments, getting up earlier, staying up later. And so remember that that allows you to be happy, centered, and be able to give to others. And that's what being successful is about.
Well,
I love that.
once again, folks, all the links to Anne Marie's books are in the chat. Head on over there. Like it takes a lot
Great book.
to get AJ excited about investing stuff. So
It
for
really
him to
does. I
be
don't get lit up that
so
often.
geeked out on the book means it's definitely worth checking out. So the link to that is there. Head on over there. Anne Marie, you've been lovely. Thank you for
Thank
joining
you.
us today, providing us with some insights. Hopefully the viewers took a little bit away from that. We'll be keeping an eye out for the wannabe Minute Master coming out in January, and maybe when that comes out, we can get you back on to talk about it. And
Oh, I would
heading into
love
the new
that.
year, if there's if we're still at all-time highs, I don't know, we'll see. But you've been lovely, Anne Marie. We truly do appreciate you joining us today. Any final words to the lovely folks out there?
Well, the final words are, I tell you, you have a loyal listener. I love what you both said prior to having me on. And so thank you. It's an honor, Cipriani. It's an honor, AJ, to be part of your show.
Well, thank you.
Awesome. Well, you enjoy the rest of your weekend, and we'll talk soon, Anne Marie.
Thank you. Bye now.
Bye. Thank
My
you.
pleasure.
All right. Very insight.
I really like what she has to say. A lot of folks have come to me, Sip, and they say, "Man, I'm in your program, but the first couple of weeks were totally, baptism by fire." And I'm going to start telling those folks who come back to me and they're like, "Man, I feel like I'm underwater. Take a break, read this book, and then come back